Run ready.
Sure. All right, mine too.
I know. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so delighted to welcome you to the kickoff of the blockchain working group. I'm Camille Crittenden, and I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues and the acting secretary of the Government Operations Agency, and Ori Khan, who's going to be our facilitator for this process over the next 10 months or so. So welcome. As you'll see from the agenda, we have a few sort of pieces of business that we want to go through, but I will turn it over in the first occasion to Acting Secretary Julie Lee.
Thanks, Camille. Good morning, blockchain working group members of the public, and those that are participating remotely. My name is Julie Lee, and I'm the Acting Secretary at the Government Operations Agency. As you know, Assembly Bill 2658 tasked GovOps with the creation of forming the blockchain working group. We've been hard at work ever since this bill was passed to stand up the working group and bring us to this moment right here, right now. So this is a big day for our agency, and we couldn't be more excited to have you all here. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of the staff at GovOps, our small but mighty agency, including Gabby Montano, our blockchain manager. The bill calls for the blockchain working group to submit a report to the legislature by July 1, 2020. The report will evaluate the developing technology's potential uses, risks, and benefits to California government, business, and residents. Our diverse 20-person working group includes experts in multiple disciplines, including technology, business, law, privacy and consumer organizations, state government, and members of the legislature. I'd like to thank Camille Crittenden for taking on the responsibility to chair this group. And finally, I'd like to profusely thank all of you working group members for their time and commitment to serve on behalf of the state of California and be a part of this important endeavor. I know that many of you have traveled to be here and taken time away from your family and paid jobs. So on behalf of the Newsom administration, I want to thank you again for your participation. The blockchain working group has generated a great deal of interest in both the public and the private sector. The state of California will look upon your leadership in demonstrating the power of this emerging technology in state government. With that, I'd like now to read the oath of office and swear in the working group members. So blockchain working group members, please stand. And raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California,
That I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California,
That I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion.
or purpose of evasion,
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Please sign your oath of office forms and give them to Gabby at the conclusion of the meeting. And let's get started.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you again to all the working group members in advance and also for being here today. And as she said, taking time out of your busy schedules. Julie alluded to the purpose of the blockchain working group. And before we get started with that, still need to go through the quorum. So we're just going to have a roll call. I know that we have established a quorum, and we'll have a chance in a few minutes to make some introductions so we all can get to know each other a little bit. But we'll just go through the list for the moment, and I ask that when you hear your name, you just respond with here. So we have a designee of Assemblymember Calderon, who is not here.
I'm actually right here.
Oh, here. Okay, would you like to sit here? Or
Sure.
we have a space for your materials if you want to sit there. Great, thank you. Designee for Senator Robert Hertzberg, Freddie Quintana. Benjamin Bonte.
Here.
Did I say the name right?
You did.
Bonte, great, thank you. Ken Musgrove.
Here.
Sergio Gutierrez.
Here.
Was that close? Okay. Amy Tom. Here. Ed Ryan.
Here.
Arshad Noor.
Here.
Sheila Warren. Here. Jason Albert.
Here.
Liz Chen. Here. Michelle Mead. Here. Meads. Thanks. Ann Neville Bonilla. Here. Ben Bartlett.
Here.
Meredith Lee. Here. Brian Balendorf.
Here.
David Tannenhouse. Looks like it's not here. And we have 3 working group members who are participating remotely, Audrey Chang, Radhika Iyengar Emmons, and Kai Stinchcomb. But including everyone who's here, we have a quorum. Just so you know, that's half plus 1, so we have to have at least 11 people to establish a quorum. And it's very important for our working group progress over the next year. We'll have about 3 meetings yet between now and July of next year. It's important for each of those that we have a quorum, so I really beg your indulgence to try to make your calendars available to join us for that. So at the moment, I just want to review briefly the working group purpose, which I think you all have reviewed already, and thank you again for your willingness to participate in submitting your request to participate. As Julie mentioned, there was a lot of interest in this group, and so we're really honored to have such a representative group here to weigh in on this important topic. So because of the legislation, we are charged with evaluating the purposes, potential uses of blockchain for the state government, the public sector, and for small businesses and businesses overall headquartered in California. So we'll look forward to getting your guidance and experts input as we come to write the report ultimately and to then make recommendations, especially back to the legislature for any statutes or other legislation that needs to be amended. And I want to mention also, thank you members of the public who are here, and we will make this microphone available for public comment if there is any. If you want to make a comment, please come forward and state your name for the record. The agendas and materials were available in the back, so we'll also ask that you limit any public comment to 2 minutes or so. But we will call for public comments in advance of any of the sections that we go on to discuss today. Is there any public comment at the moment? So at this point, I'm really delighted to introduce our facilitator, Dr. Ori Koma, who will help us to explain the process and just make sure that that the process runs smoothly, and will help to organize the meetings in advance and to work with us as we go through the working group meetings.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be working with you and with Camille as my partner in this as we think through what is the appropriate process to bring such diverse perspective into a very important conversation. So really looking forward to what's to come, and really thinking of this working group as a learning group. It's really an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. So we're expecting a lively discussion and debate throughout this process as we think through what recommendation we want to bring forth to California. So before we get into kind of the logistics of today's meeting, we thought it would be really important to spend a little bit of time with this group, getting to know who's here and who you represent. We really think of today's meeting as kind of as setting the foundation for the process. So we want to spend some time learning who's here. At the same time, as a facilitator, I'm also a time manager. And so I will keep you on task throughout this process. And I'll try to do that in a gentle way. But what we want to start with today is some introduction. So if we can just go around and introduce yourself and spend just a little bit of time sharing the perspective that you bring, the voice that you bring to this discussion today. And I was asked to actually time you. So you each have 1.5 minutes and you'll hear the days on the phone. And we'll just keep going. There's a lot of us here, so we wanted to make sure that we can move forward into our agenda. But we really want to hear from you, who you represent today. Is it okay, Jason, if I start with you?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jason Albert, and I am Deputy General Counsel for Policy and Public Affairs at Workday. Workday is a provider of human capital management and financial management services based in the cloud to large and medium-sized enterprises. The perspective that I come to blockchain from is thinking about it from a policy perspective with respect to use cases, mainly other than cryptocurrency. There's been a lot of discussion about cryptocurrency, but as we look at blockchain, we think a lot about digital identity, and naturally being a human capital management company, the ability of blockchain to allow better secure authentication of credentials, supply chain management, the ability to trace items as they move through the supply chain, smart contracts, basically things that make transactions easier, that allow people to enhance their privacy by sharing less information but highly verified. So like when I go to a bar, I can prove to the bartender through a blockchain verified credential that I'm over 21 without the bartender having to see my exact age and my address or my icon or things like that. So from our perspective, I think it would be really interesting as we look at blockchain, look broadly at it, and to explore the full range of use cases beyond those that dominate the headlines.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Liz Chen, and I'm with Ripple Labs. Ripple is a distributed ledger technology solution provider that aims to move value as information moves today. My interest in this group is really on a personal level. I worked for an assortment of technology companies at the time. When I worked for them, were considered highly innovative. And I've also worked in the public sector at the OECD. So I think my experience has been that typically with new innovations, new technologies, the response from government is usually a split of fear and opportunity. And my hope is that with this group, we can actually come up with a set of reasonable principled guidelines on which this technology and innovation can really thrive and have a home in California.
Thank you. Michelle?
It's Michelle Neitz, and I am a professor of law at Golden Gate University School of Law. I have an unusual teaching package. I teach corporate law, poverty law, and legal ethics. And in the spring, I'll be teaching the blockchain in the law course. And so blockchain technology first piqued my interest because it actually is a technology that cuts across all of the academic areas of study and research that I do. So blockchain technology obviously is going to have great impact on corporations, but it's also going to have impact on low-income populations. And I'm especially interested, this year my research project has focused on the ethics of blockchain technology, and really hoping to bring to the table some discussion of issues like bias and conflicts of interest and issues that have not previously been considered as the technology is developed.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ben Bartlett, and I am on the City Council of Berkeley, and also an attorney, and I represent blockchain companies. I'm really excited to be here because me and my friends, we advocated for the creation of this body and the passage of this law. So it's good to be here. In Berkeley, of course, we created a form of municipal finance using blockchain technology to greatly lower cost and make bonds accessible to ordinary people. So I believe this technology can be a real cornerstone and foundational element of a new equitable economy, which speeds capital flow and allows access to the capital markets for the first time for many people.
Hello, my name is Meredith Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub, which is one of 4 regional innovation hubs funded by the National Science Foundation to build and strengthen partnerships across industry, academia, nonprofits, and government. I'm headquartered at UC Berkeley and was born and raised in the Bay Area, went to Stanford as an electrical engineer, so it's nice to see all of these paths combine with this effort. We are particularly interested, as was mentioned, on the ethics angle and responsible data and technology deployment. So I'm interested in seeing the community engagement lens, workforce development, and the broader impacts of our recommendations. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Anne Neville Bonilla. I'm the director of the California Research Bureau. We provide research and analysis to the legislature and to the governor's office, and we are part of the California State Library. My background has been mainly around broadband and digital inclusion, looking at the impact of technology on different communities. And that's in fact how I started in California. And I'm really excited about the opportunity for this group looking at opportunities and challenges in the public and private sector, and thinking about particularly for those public sector services that we are thinking at the forefront about how they may impact or harm groups that are often not the first technology adopters. And similarly, thinking about private sector applications and thinking about how they might be made more open to all Californians, which is sometimes doesn't happen in the beginning.
I'm Brian Bellendorf. I'm the Executive Director of Hyperledger, which is a project embedded inside the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation as a whole, and Hyperledger specifically, is a consortium of vendors and government agencies, nonprofits, central banks, many others coming together to build open source software around distributed ledgers and smart contract technology, typically focusing less on the cryptocurrency applications and more on, as has been described, supply chains, trade finance, these sorts of distributed applications. And what pulled me into this space wasn't making the banks, a few milliseconds faster. It was use cases like land titles in emerging markets. It was dealing with this, the draining of the reservoir of trust that people have had both in the technology industry and in institutions in the world. And I believe this technology can help us kind of replenish some of that trust and build in systems that provide greater guarantees around that. I hope to bring perspectives somewhat from the private sector, certainly not any company-specific perspective, but kind of broadly stated, how do we operationalize, commercialize, help kind of uplift industry into this space, but also really focus on new challenges that the state has and broader societal challenges through the application of this technology.
My name is David Tenenhouse. I'm a Senior Vice President and Chief Research Officer at VMware. Although we're not a well-known consumer brand name, we're one of the top handful of software companies that provide software to enterprises and governments worldwide. We've started our blockchain journey about 4 years ago, and particularly are interested in the ways in which blockchain can help us achieve decentralized trust and really completely change the way in which organizations work with each other. This could be companies working together in supply chains, it could be the finance industry working together, it can be how governments work with each other, how companies work with governments. So anything that crosses organizational boundaries can be completely changed. Particularly interesting to us is that it also creates an opportunity to reinvent how regulators and auditors are involved. And so we find that particularly interesting and related to the government and public agenda. At VMware, we strongly believe in engineering for good, and that is actually kind of core to our corporate values. So we see I'm really particularly pleased to see the folks involved with ethics and inclusion and generally trust involved in this activity. And we'd also say that we also think that in order to get engineering for good, you need good engineering. It's very important for new technology like blockchain to be well understood, well characterized, so people know when it works, when it doesn't work. And those are the things that allow us to deliver up great technologies without unintended consequences.
My name is Freddie Quintana. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Bob Hertzberg, representing the San Fernando Valley. Our background in the issue is that he had originally authored a bill 2 years ago to allow blockchain technology to be used for the issuance and transfer of stock certificates. In this most recent year, legislative year, we were successful with that. This recent year, though, we went along with the bill to allow blockchain certificates, blockchain technology to be used for vital records, marriage certificates, death certificates, and birth certificates. Pending the work of this group, we held our bill in the Assembly Privacy Committee, though. Our goal as a legislator has been to see where we can modernize government, how we can increase uses of this new technology in a secure fashion. For some of our colleagues, both in the legislature and my peers in the legislative staff, trying to expand the idea that blockchain is more than just kind of a sophisticated Excel spreadsheet, is actually something that we face on a regular basis. And with that, we look forward to a positive year and look forward to having a good relationship with this working group.
Good morning, my name is Lynette Tang, and I'm here on behalf of Assembly Majority Leader Ian Calderon. He was the legislator that carry the bill AB 2658 that created and established this working group. So we're looking forward to moving forward and learning and working with everyone on this task force.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Tong. I'm the State Chief Information Officer, also the Director of California Department of Technology. I'm very happy to be here, and it's a great privilege to be joined by such a large group of committee members with such diverse background. My main focus on this, typically be thinking technology, or I'm here as a technologist, not so much. Really looking for opportunity to learn from all of you. Not only the technology implementations, but more so on the policy when it comes to responsible use, as well as the strategy on what would be the good use case to apply to the state of California, and what are some of the things that we need to be more thoughtful of. So finding that well-balanced approach is what I'm interested to learn from all of you.
Good morning. My name is Ken Musgrove. I'm the Chief Information Officer with the Franchise Tax Board. I have about 20 years with the Franchise Tax Board. My background is in computer science and software engineering. We're very interested in the financial aspects of the technology, and we're also very interested in some of the security aspects for fraud prevention and detection. So very happy to be part of the group. Thank you.
Good morning, all. My name is Sergio Gutierrez. I'm the Agency Chief Information Officer for the California Environmental Protection Agency. Very happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And really, my goal and attempt to try to get an understanding of blockchain and the things that we do already for our constituents out there and the public as it relates to our services and how we can improve those services and continue to collaborate with our constituents and improve those services with them. So that's my goal.
Good morning, my name is Ben Monti. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the California Department of Industrial Relations. Included in our department is a number of divisions, including the Labor Commissioner's Office, the Division of Workers' Compensation, Cal OSHA, Division of Apprenticeship Standards. So we do a number of things, and we've been looking into various ways that blockchain can be of use to us. I'm encouraged to hear some of the discussion earlier about workforce and underserved populations, because that's very much where our department operates. So I'm looking forward to the conversations and participating in the group.
I'm Sheila Warren. I am the head of blockchain and distributed technology at the World Economic Forum, based in our San Francisco office. We are a policy shop. We work on creating multi-stakeholder communities that then co-design policy interventions, and we pilot them in jurisdictions around the world to ensure that we are accelerating the benefits of this technology, but also mitigating some of the risks and challenges it can pose. We have a portfolio of projects that include work with central banks, focused on supply chain, cryptocurrency regulation, the consortium creation, just thinking about how to actually get a group together to even begin to have discrete conversations and appropriate conversations about this technology, and transparency. Now, of course, on that last point, it's not at all obvious that the enhanced transparency capabilities of this technology would actually lead to more accountability by any body, including government. In fact, it could lead to more exploitation, which would be, I think, our default assumption. So one thing we think a lot about, and I'm personally very interested and invested in, is how you enhance the engagement using this technology, while also preserving core elements of privacy. We also have personal interest, and we focus the forum as well, on mitigation of bias. So whether it's not trying to replicate biases that were engendered in the Tech 2.0 revolution and building upon those foundations, but thinking about new ways to ensure that this new technology really does realize its promise and potential, and that we do better. That also involves, of course, the inclusion of communities that have not historically been considered in the creation of these technologies. And the other thing I have on the last note is just a concern and an interest in really thinking about how we might introduce more agility into the governance and processes that governments specifically use around technologies.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Arshad Noor. I'm the CTO of a small company called Strong Key. I have an interesting background. I have an undergraduate degree in geology, a master's of business administration and corporate finance, but out of a love and passion for technology, I've been working in the field of information technology for over 33 years. And drawn to cryptography for the last 20. In the last 20 years, I have created many cryptographic key management systems, technology that encrypts, tokenizes, digitally signs, manages cryptographic keys for central banks, telecommunication companies, militaries, and Fortune 500 companies. Since California first passed the breach disclosure law about 15 years ago, I've had the misfortune to see more than 9,000 publicly disclosed breaches, at least in the United States, with more than 11.5 billion records disclosed publicly. What this has told me is that despite the billions and billions of dollars that are spent on security, our infrastructure is woefully inadequate to protect us. And we're building huge edifices, multi-trillion-dollar economies on technology, but using security capabilities that were probably invented when I was born. User ID passwords. We're still using the most easily attacked technology to authenticate human beings on this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure. It is my belief that blockchain will have hugely transformative capabilities, but without the right security, it is going to lead to chaos. That is my personal belief. The evidence is out there. You just have to see it to understand what the capabilities of attackers are. My hope is that my volunteering on this working group will help bring some caution and some expertise in the field of cybersecurity to this space. Thank you.
Ted Ryan. I've worked at the Department of Finance for approximately 5 years, and I'm interested in
Excuse me,
learning.
Ted, I'm not sure that it's working.
Ted Ryan, Department of Finance. I've worked at the department for approximately 5 years, and I'm interested in learning more about this technology to help our department evaluate future blockchain proposals.
Gabby, do we have anyone online that we can check with?
Check Audrey? Audrey? Is it possible?
Can we hear from her?
Hello, Audrey? Hello? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
Hello? Great. Hi, I'm Audrey Chang. Apologize I can't be there with you in person today, but looking forward to meeting everyone in person at the next meeting. I'm an independent blockchain analyst, consultant, and investor, and I run blockchain.org. I first became involved with Bitcoin in 2013, whereas only Bitcoin before blockchain was a term. I'm also a member of the Oakland Blockchain Developers and Vessel Peer Developers. Previously, I co-founded 2 companies through which I participated in Startup Chile and Singularity University. And before that, I was on Wall Street for a decade as an investment trader and research analyst. And I also earned my bachelor's degree in computer science at MIT and also got my MBA at Wharton. So basically, blockchain encompasses every part of my background, from the computer science part to finance and entrepreneurship and business. And I'm very excited about this effort because I think Liz mentioned kind of fear and opportunity, and there's both of that, right? So with any new rapidly evolving technology, there is a high potential for improving and expanding the way that things do now, but there's also risk for kind of unintended consequences in particular. As it relates to government, there's a lot of exciting examples that I see already, including the UN refugee camps in Pakistan and Jordan, as well as the birth record and driver's license management initiatives in Illinois. And I think that blockchain could help both industry and government achieve objectives faster, cheaper, and with more transparency, as well as, it's very important not to forget, as many people have mentioned already, kind of the voices and services to underserved people, and making sure that we keep in mind things like privacy and things that are for the greater good. So looking forward to working with this very diverse group.
Thank you. Anyone else online? Tax Digital. Tax.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
This is Radhika Iyengar-Emmons. I'm a managing partner of Double Nova Group, blockchain advisory and strategy company. We work with companies large and small, including startups, on shaping strategies around the use of blockchain technology. I too had hoped to be there in person today, but couldn't. But look forward to meeting you all in person at the next meeting in December. I have been working with blockchain the last 2.5, 3 years. Got into blockchain primarily through my love of on the healthcare side. Very passionate about the applications of blockchain in healthcare, bringing universal access to healthcare, reshaping the conversations around what healthcare truly means from a predictive, personalized, and participatory perspective. And I think that blockchain, in addition to the whole reshaping conversation around digital identity and self-sovereign identity, is going to be pretty exciting in applications of healthcare, but also in many other areas. Double Group, as a company, we worked with companies in supply chain, in fintech, and also in healthcare. And really looking at the broad applications of this technology in many different areas. As a background, I think it's really meaningful for me to be here because I'm an immigrant. I'm originally from India. I grew up in North Africa and did all of my university education here in the US with an undergrad from Bryn Mawr College. And for me to be a part of this group is really meaningful because we're really bringing many different conversations that are going on globally, but applying them locally to our state of California. So I think this is a particularly exciting time for us to share ideas and to learn from one another. And I'm really looking forward to being a part of this group. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a third member.
Hi everyone, Kai Digital. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Proven that does financial services, especially banking and investment for people with intellectual disabilities, including vulnerable older people with memory loss and folks under power termination. I came to blockchain as sort of a potential consumer, I guess, as somebody who built a financial institution from the ground up, with a focus on financial transaction processing, holding of securities, and then some of the technical security and auditability that comes with that, especially when you're dealing with a vulnerable population. There might be untrustworthy stakeholders, potential for abuse, working with tough to identify populations, often the people that we work with don't have a credit history, and then building up the privacy policies and money laundering controls, and then in a past life, I did game theory in grad school, and then spent a while working on voting systems. And the thing that I found was that almost always when I looked at some of the blockchain-based applications that were being, proposed for needs that I was quite familiar with, was that I found that I didn't see the differentiating, like that you can look at it and say, oh, I'm enthusiastic about the promise of this technology, but as a potential user, I don't actually think that the proposed solution works. And I couldn't actually find anybody that did need a blockchain-based solution as an industry participant or as a sort of a consumer. And I was concerned, actually, I would say further, that this was sort of a almost like a technology privilege thing often, that for example, voting systems where I'm super passionate, I found that there were genuine experts in voting systems who really knew a lot about what are the shortcomings, how do you hack an election, how does one disenfranchise people, et cetera. And that the blockchain people really had a pretty profound, and typically, sort of younger, male, well-educated, blockchain people had a real disregard for the expertise of people that have been working in the industry for a long time. And so that was something that kind of brought me in. And I guess the reason that I'm here is because I'm nervous about sort of, like 90% of ICOs never produce a company and 90% of blockchain pilots never produce a deployment. And that often sort of well-intentioned but ill-informed blockchain projects sort of form a distraction from more prosaic but higher impact things and distract talent and capital formation and so on. And so I'm excited for about a lot of things that I've heard in both bio and that is contributed to sort of how do you avoid some of the potentially distracting real student implementations and provide sort of real solutions for people's companies.
Thank you. So I think something to keep in mind that we heard in your introductions, some key principles that we may want to keep at the forefront as we think about those opportunities to advance research and innovation, to see how we can apply towards policy and application. You mentioned the importance of equity and accessibility, developing trust through transparency, and thinking about partnerships, and also thinking about the word I'm thinking of is a facilitator word is engagement. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. So thinking about partnerships and engagement as we think about all the different components will be really important. So let's keep those concepts at the forefront as we go through this. So thank you for sharing. What I want to do is just go a little bit through the materials that you have in front of you to support our discussion today. Our objective today really is just to kick off and get on a common foundation. We're going to spend a lot of time understanding the bag key rules, which govern the way we work together, and start thinking about the process, the timeline, and where are we going with this, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the table of contents that we hopefully will shape the process that we're working so we can have recommendations to legislature and this. So in front of you, you have the agenda, which we will go through today. You also have the member handbook, which Camille's going to go through. And there's some materials in there that you will want me to review and sign. There's 3 handouts for the Gravity Key, which we will review. And then lastly, you have a table of contents. This is really just a working draft to get our discussion started today. And that will be a key outcome that we hope to get out of the conversation at the end of the meeting. So these are all the materials in front of you. And as we begin our conversation, I'd just like to suggest some guidelines for our conversations today and the coming meetings. Want to use common conversational courtesy. We're going to ask you to speak one at a time using your tent. So if you would like to speak, if you can raise your tent, preferably with your name facing us, because it'll take time to remember all of your name. Also, because we are a working group and we're really pulling our sleeves to work together, we were hoping that we could use first names as we address each other. To the extent possible, please avoid side conversation. We really want to focus on one flow conversation. A reminder that all ideas and points of view have value. We're here for learning, so really encourage curiosity and wanting to understand different perspectives and expand our lens of thinking. Avoid assuming and analyzing the motivation of others. Be honest, fair, and candid as possible. Honor time and share time. Want to make sure that we hear from everyone and learn from everyone. So to the extent that you can, please be concise with your examples and comments. Humor and goodwill are invited. We're all in this together. I don't think I need to highlight the importance of being innovative and welcoming new ideas. This is what this is all about. So we're looking forward to that. And to the extent that you can, we would like to limit technology, cell phone, and computer courtesy are encouraged. This is really a time for us to focus on each other and our conversation. So really want to encourage that, knowing that it's really hard. So just wanted to put it up there that, to the extent you can, this is a people conversation. And lastly, to support how we're tracking your conversation and promote understanding. Particularly important to me is if you can avoid acronym, that would be great, or if you are using acronym, educate us as to what they mean. When you speak, please state your name for our record keeping so we can track your thoughts. Anybody else that has any other guideline that you think would help promote discussion here? I always like to get new ideas for conversation. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm just gonna send it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Artie. I know that this context and setup is fairly formal, but I'm hoping that nevertheless we can have some good conversations and real exchange among us. And I just wanted to say that I think you see from the introductions that people provided that we really strove to have a diversity of viewpoints. We wanted to have people from government, from nonprofit organizations, from industry, from startups. We wanted to have people who are very, advanced in their technological understanding and others who were more advanced in the kind of policy context. And so I think this is a really rich opportunity for us all to learn from one another on this really exciting, important, perhaps daunting, emerging technology. We also wanted to have a diversity of viewpoints about people who... Please turn off your cell phone. For people who were very, enthusiastic about blockchain adoption versus those who were maybe a little bit more skeptical. So I think that the outcome that we'll come to at the end of the process will be all the more strengthened through having those kind of robust discussions. So thank you for your opinions and your expertise. Also, just to say maybe 2 sentences about my own background, you might have seen in the short bio, I'm executive director at an organization called the Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society. So it's a multi-campus, multidisciplinary research center. It's based at UC Berkeley, also including campuses at UC Davis, Merced, and Santa Cruz. So our purpose is really to develop new technology across a range of areas in sustainability and health and robotics and AI. And then emerging more with some new initiatives on technology and society. So we've created the Citrus Policy Lab. We have an initiative on the future of work and on women in technology. So that's where my background comes from. I'm not trained as a technologist, but I am, quite enthusiastic about helping other people to develop what is going to be so pervasive, not only here in California, but indeed throughout the country and the world. And I'm honored to work with you on this project.
So Camille, I already owe you an apology because part of having a facilitator is recognizing that although you're sitting on this side and you're a chair, you're part of the working group and therefore you're going to have a voice in the conversation. So I just want to recognize.
Thank you. Great, so you have a lot of materials in front of you, and I just want to highlight a couple of items before we get started with the Bagdad training. That there are some things that we need a response from you on and signing. There are 3 things that I see: non-discrimination policy and complaint procedures memo and acknowledgement form. So we want to make sure that you know how that works. And if you're going to be claiming travel reimbursement, we need a couple other forms for that: authorization to use privately owned vehicles and your AE data record. So Gabby will be the person to return those items to, either in person or scanned by email. Any questions about those or about the materials that we covered already? Jason.
I may have missed it, but we have the oath of office form, but the non-discrimination and other forms I don't think are included in the packet.
I will send them all via email, and then you can send them right back to me afterwards.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Email. Wow. I was noting in some of our original instructions the kind of disconnect in the instructions between this blockchain working group that's working on this emerging exciting technology, and you must return all your forms by US mail. So we were able to amend that. Great. So I also want to just highlight that the materials that we have does not have specific information about the decision-making process, and Orby will talk a little bit more about this later on. But we're going to be having some one-on-one conversations with you about your input to the process, and we'll also provide more information later about decision-making process and how we'll go about voting and on decisions, things that need official decision. Great, so at this time I want to introduce Julia Zuccoletto, the Attorney General's Office will brief about that with me.
Good morning. I'm Julia Zuccoletto. I'm with the Government Law Section of the Attorney General's Office. And I am here today to tell you that complying with the Bagley-Keene Act is frustrating. So just remember that. What it does, it will deprive you of natural communication patterns. In between public meetings, you may find the urge to pick up the phone and call a few of the members to pick their brain, or you may want to go and have lunch and working group topics may come up. But such activity is limited by the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So learning how to live under those restrictions as a member will take some adjustment, and it's not intuitive. But if you understand the philosophy behind the Bagley-Keene Act, it will make it easier for you to comply with its requirements. It's important to remember that the purpose of Bagley-Keene is not to promote government efficiency. Had the legislature wanted this to be an efficient process, it would have just had a department make decisions and come up with the policies surrounding blockchain. But instead, the legislature, when it created this body, had two value judgments in mind. First, it wanted to promote consensus building. It wanted to bring together a group of people with diverse backgrounds and experiences, and you would be then collaborating and building a consensus. Second, it wanted to reserve for the public a seat at the table as you reach your consensus. If you keep these two policies in mind, the need for consensus building on the one hand, and the fact that the public is invited to a seat at the table on the other, it should help you as you move forward in this process. So, Bagley-Keene applies to state bodies. Some of you may be familiar with the Brown Act, which is very similar to the Bagley-Keene Act, but that applies to local bodies. Bagley-Keene applies to 5 types of state bodies, but I'm only going to discuss two today. The first type is any state body created by statute, which this body was created by AB 2638. The Bagley-Keene Act also applies to subcommittees created by state bodies. So if you as a working group create a subcommittee of 3 or more persons, this subcommittee will be subject to the Bagley-Keene requirements. It applies to any time you take formal action to create a subcommittee, but formal action can really be any action of this working group resulting in the creation of a subcommittee of 3 or more persons. It also applies if a subcommittee is created by members of this working group. So we've advised that a subcommittee can inadvertently be created by members of a body such as this if over time 3 or more members meet outside of a public meeting to discuss topics under the jurisdiction of this group. For that reason, we encourage that you try to limit your conversations with each other to no more than one other member of the group, and that all the conversations take place at a public meeting. So these requirements apply immediately upon appointment, even before today's meeting, even before an oath is taken. Once the appointment is made, the Bagley-Keene Act applies. The basic concept is that meetings are open to the public. So what would be a meeting? A meeting is a gathering of the majority of this body to deliberate on a topic under your jurisdiction. And deliberation includes all phases of decision making. It's not just reaching a final decision or recommendation, but it's all steps leading up to that final recommendation. So it includes information gathering. So right now I'm giving you information that is subject to the open meeting requirements. Again, the Bagley-Keene Act gives the public the right to be present not only when you're reaching a final decision, but during the process, the consensus building process leading to that decision. A type of meeting that the Bagley-Keene Act prohibits are serial meetings. A serial meeting is a series of communications among each one involving less than a majority of the members, but collectively will involve a majority of the members. This could take the form of a chain of communications where one member talks to a second member, who talks to a third member, who talks to a fourth member, or it could take place in the form of one person acts as the head of a wheel and contacts members who and they gather all of that information and then communicate it with the others. Serial meetings can occur directly or indirectly. So if you have an employee or a representative talking to employees or representatives of other members, that could still be a serial meeting and it could be in violation of the open meeting requirements. The serial meeting prohibition also applies to any subcommittees of 3 or more persons that you may create, which are subject to open meeting requirements. So if you're on a subcommittee and those subcommittees are having open meetings, you also have to keep in mind that a majority of the subcommittee members must avoid having serial communications. And these serial communications that are prohibited can take place in any format, whether it's a one-on-one conversation, an email, social media. If somehow you're communicating outside of a public meeting in whatever type of way you can think of, you should try to make sure that it all happens during a public meeting. Again, the philosophy behind the act is to promote public participation in the working group's deliberation process. So to the extent that there's any communications happening outside of that public process, it's defeating the purpose of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. There's a few exceptions, and so I'll go on those. We used to advise that staff couldn't even talk to members of state bodies, but the legislature thought that was too conservative, and so they created a safe harbor. And what that does is it allows each of you individually to talk to staff. But staff can't share anything that you may say individually to them with any other member of the group. And what that does is it allows you as board members to get the information that you may require before a public meeting. Another exception to communications that may involve a majority is the Act creates an exception for you may communicate with one other person as a member. What that means is if there is a member of the public who wishes to meet with each of you individually, that is not prohibited by Bagley-Keene. But if you use that exception as a means to kind of orchestrate a way to communicate with each other, that's a problem. But every member of the public, if they choose to and they make an appointment with you, can ask to meet with each of you, and that's okay as long as, again, it's not a serial meeting. Also, you may find yourself at a conference where a majority of you might be, or you may find yourself at a public meeting of another government agency, or a public meeting held by a nonprofit organization, or even a social gathering. And if you do find yourself in these situations where there might be a majority of you, as long as you're not using that forum as an opportunity to talk about working group business, then those other situations are okay under Bagley-Keene. You just have to limit the topics that you discuss at those types of situations. Another exception is if you create a standing subcommittee of 3 or more persons, and a majority of this working group wants to attend one of those subcommittee meetings, it will not be a meeting of the entire working group as long as the members who are not members of that subcommittee attend only as observers. So if you want to attend a subcommittee meeting and you want to be able to be part of that meeting, then it really should be noticed as a meeting of the entire working group. So I'm going to talk about some rights of the public. When you do have a public meeting such as this, the public has certain rights. The first one is that the public has a right to attend and participate in meetings anonymously. They are not required to identify who they are. They may be asked by security to provide some form of identification, which is fine, but they can come before you and tell you their viewpoint without having to identify who they are. The public has a right to speak at meetings. They have a right to criticize everything that you want to talk about. You as a working group can establish reasonable time limits. Whether a time limit is reasonable depends on the circumstances of each meeting. It depends on the time allocated to the meeting, the number and complexity of each agenda item, and the number of persons wishing to speak at the public meeting. And it's really a determination made at each individual meeting. The public also has a right to request public meeting records, and what these are any records that are distributed to a majority of the working group. So if you receive something and a majority of the other members have received it, the public can request a copy of that, and that must be provided to a member of the public immediately. And that could include things like staff memos, agenda packets, all of this material that you have with you today. Since we are talking about public records, I'm going to briefly mention the Public Records Act in addition to the Bagley-Keene Act. Under the Public Records Act, access to public records is a public right. It is also a fundamental right protected by the California Constitution. The general rule is that all public records of state agencies must be disclosed upon request unless there is an exemption. Because you as an advisory body, you're part of the state and the state agency, then all of your records are subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act. The primary purpose of the Public Records Act, like the Bagley-Keene Act, is that the public should have the ability to monitor the activity of government agencies. A public record is any writing. Basically, if you can think of any form of how a communication can be recorded, then it's subject to the Public Records Act. That would be a document, a thumb drive, any type of electronic recording, even an answering machine that has that type of recording. Anything that you have as a recorded communication is a writing subject to the Public Records Act. This also includes text messages, If it's involving the official conduct of government, it's subject to the Public Records Act. This would be sending a personal email, using your personal email account. Those are, and it's related to the conduct of official business. It's subject to the Public Records Act. When a person makes a request under the Public Records Act, they can do it either in a written form or they can just call and ask for a record. They don't necessarily have to name the specific public record that they are looking for. They can just kind of generally describe its contents. But their request has to be specific and focused, so, and not unduly burdensome. So it has to be something more than just give me all your public records. But they need to, provide a little bit more information, a little bit more specificity, a little bit more focus. But the state agencies do have an obligation to try to understand what their request is. If it's vague, they can't just say, we don't know what you're asking for, and then stop there. There has to be a little bit of assistance to figure out what it is that a member of the public may be requesting. It can be, although requests can be unduly burdensome, we do recognize that it can be time consuming for staff to respond to these requests. And that's not really a reason not to provide the records that someone is requesting. Anyone can go to an agency and request public records. And most of the time, if they're accessible, they can be provided a copy of that record. But there are times when they may need to make an appointment if it's a type of record that's hard to retrieve. An agency should try to respond to requests within 10 days, but there's an opportunity to request an extension if that's required because of the record that they may be requesting. I'm not going to go over all the exemptions today, but there are many, many exemptions. Some are in the Public Records Act, some are other statutes that are specific to particular agencies. When you do use an exemption, you must disclose to the requester what exemption that you are using when you're not providing your record. So I've just provided a very high-level overview of the Bagley-Keene Act and the Public Records Act, and I wanted to leave you with a few takeaways. Just remember, you may individually contact staff to ask questions or gather information about an upcoming agenda item, so long as staff does not share these conversations with other members. When members receive information from staff, you should avoid communicating with other members about that information. Members may communicate individually with members of the public to share the work of the working group, indicate whether the views expressed are those of the working group or your own, and listen to comments from the public. As a working group member, you are permitted to discuss working group business with, we recommend, only one other member outside of the public meeting. So anytime there are 3 or more of you, and you may just be standing in line at a coffee shop, you should just try to remember that this isn't the time to start talking about blockchain activity. And then, given the makeup of the working group, you may find yourself at other events outside of the public meeting, and that's perfectly fine as long as you avoid talking about these the topics that are the subject of this working group. The only other thing I want to mention is this was a very high-level overview that really was to provide guidance to each of you in terms of communications. There's so much more in the Valley King Open Meeting Act that we are available to your staff and council as these questions come up. I know that there's been a great deal of discussion about how to come up with a collaborative writing under the restrictions of Valley King. And so we've been working with your council in terms of coming up with, they have some options that they may suggest to you going forward. So if anyone has any questions about Valley King or the Public Records Act, I'm happy to address them.
Maybe, do you want to just say a little bit more about the report writing and some of your recommendations that we've talked about? Because that will be the main work product of this group. And at least in some of the contexts where I have worked with, a team on trying to come up with something collaboratively, there are more online document sharing tools that we have used that make that sort of collaborative writing easier. But it sounds like the requirements of Valley King are going to prevent that to a certain extent. So I wondered if you just wanted to give the working group a little bit more information about how we might go about doing that.
I think I was leaving it to your council to kind of come up with the various options for the committee the group to consider. I was more focused on what you can't do. And she's more like, well, now that we know what you can't do, here are some ways that you can try to write collaboratively. I don't know.
Did you want me to briefly address that? Okay. So I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. I'm Diana Barbu. I'm an attorney with Department of General Services, which is under the branch of the Government Operations Agency. I will be counsel to this work group, mainly focusing on compliance with the Valley King Open Meeting Act. I do have some suggestions for the work group of things that could be done to collaboratively write the report. I'll just mention them very briefly. There'll be a lot more details, and it'll really depend on how the information comes out in the work group for you all to decide which method is best. So one way to do that is for someone to take a chance on a first draft after a couple meetings maybe, or after even one meeting. After items are discussed, somebody might just put together a first draft, which would be shared with all of you, and then each individual work group member would be able to only communicate with the staff person on their comments. And then at the next meeting, that first draft with all your comments would then be discussed publicly and might result in a second draft, which again, only one person would write. So it's kind of a cumbersome process, but it would be, that would be one idea. Another could be to form a subcommittee of 2 members, which would not have to comply with Valley King in terms of them, just those 2 members working together to write the draft and follow the same process, share it with all of you. One-way communications only with the staff person in terms of your comments, and then at the next meeting to discuss that draft. That's 2 suggestions that are probably the easiest, but we could talk more as you all kind of put your ideas together about if there's other ways to do it. So that's just 2 suggestions.
Go great.
Quick question on what we can't do, and then one on what we can. On what we can't, we can't talk about blockchain at all if 3 of us find ourselves in an elevator and somebody suggests, hey, have you seen that new technology, whatever, like, or is it specific to like the products, work items, and agendas of these meetings?
Well, the Valley King Act says anything that's under the subject matter jurisdiction of your working group. So I am sure that not everything that's blockchain related is necessarily under your jurisdiction, but I don't know enough about if it's going to be addressed in your report, then it may be something you want to think about not discussing. We have gotten the question in the past about articles that come out and how to distribute that to all the members of a committee, and we've always suggested that staff do that. If there's an interesting article, staff gives everyone a copy of that article, and they usually do it with the BCC so that there's no reply to all, oh, this is a great article, what a great idea. So I don't know if that answers your question, or?
Not yet. But on what we can, there are various document collaboration approaches that can involve the public in some controlled but still open way. And is Bradley Keene, does it give you a safe harbor to operate in some very public way? And it's properly amended, whatever, but like notice, but allow us to do kind of online tooling and kind of ongoing, or do we have to only engage when we're in these 4-hour stretches between here and July?
Well, you could have smaller subcommittees hold public meetings, but Bradley Keene doesn't apply to any online format, even if it's open to the public, if that's what you were suggesting. It's, it was written where a lot of these technologies didn't exist, but the whole point is that the public should be aware of the meeting time and location and have the opportunity to attend and participate. And online forms may be less available to the public, which could be why there hasn't really been any reason or any movement maybe to try to adapt these open meeting requirements to some other type of technology alternatives.
I just wanted to make a quick note on that. Another layer of Bradley Keene is also ADA compliance. So if a member of the public that has a disability requests some kind of accommodation, that's much harder online. So that is one thing to consider why in-person public open meetings are required, because this way we could accommodate any type of disability pretty much. So that's just keep in mind.
So if I can just to add to what you were saying, Brian, I hear your concern that we're dealing with such a broad topic that maybe you're not going to be able to talk about anything outside of this work group meeting. And I'm wondering if legal counsel can help us at these meetings to define the boundaries of what has to stay within the Bradley Keene, so members are comfortable with understanding what is outside of the working group content that they can have a more open discussion around.
Do you want me to address that now?
But just the idea of checking in with you regularly to define the boundaries.
Right, yeah, I'm always available. I will be here at every meeting. And if any member has a question for council, we can pause and I can answer it as long as it's not extremely detailed to the extent that it would violate attorney-client privilege. I could give you some advice or some ideas anytime. So any member could ask at any point.
And we're always available to counsel for our state agencies if there's a kind of a question that they just want to bounce off of us.
Great. So Sheila and then Dana.
And I'm just assuming because of accessibility issues, we couldn't have subcommittees meet or convene by phone, even with notice and some sort of chat function with the public or anything like that.
There's 2 exceptions to having a meeting, a physical meeting with all the members in one place. And one of them you're using right now, you've got 3 members who are appearing by phone. But there's another one where you could have more members appear by phone. So your counsel will be able to describe those 2 options to you. David?
I guess I'm trying to understand 2 things. One is the materials refer to the rule of 2. There isn't actually, as far as I can tell, a slide describing the rule of 2. So I'm a little unclear based on what you said, what the 2 people can say to each other.
Well,
I just want to actually provide an example.
Okay.
We're both involved with paper ledger. It just happened to somebody sat us together by accident, but it so happens both of our organizations are members of that same organization. So,
What can we talk about? Just you and I.
Or even in a meeting of that organization.
So the rule of 2 is just a rule of thumb, and it's because of the statute says that a subcommittee of 3 or more persons created by a state body or a state body member is subject to the open meeting requirements of Bradley Keene. And anytime the court has considered this statute in particular, they've kind of taken a broad view of what an advisory body could be. So we've always said a rule of two is a very cautious approach of applying this particular provision, where you just try to limit your conversations to just one other member. To the extent that three members are getting together, to have coffee right before a meeting to discuss the agenda, and they do this every month, over time, we think that would become a subcommittee subject to bag routine. We can't tell you at what point that would be, because there's really not a lot of law on it, but we do think that if there's a pattern of communication among three or more of you, that would become a subcommittee. But a one-time situation is probably not going to be a problem. I don't know enough about your the conversations you would have, but if they kind of fall within what your particular organization does, I'm not sure that would be a concern, especially because it's only involving the two of you. But it is something that your council could get more details on and can advise you through that. Like I said, it's frustrating, especially at my large.
It's funny how much the words consensus are a part of what blockchains are about, right? Very gossipy, chatty protocols between nodes and things. So, yeah, it will be, I'm sure we can work that.
Look, I just want to extend this a little because there's a lot of public meetings unrelated to this. In this past week, I've been at 3 different events. I could easily imagine a situation where there happen to be 3 of us at those events. It's a public event. The topic of blockchains, being discussed. Is that an issue? Do we have to coordinate so we don't go to the same meetings?
Well, and
That might actually help.
The point is you can all go to the meetings anytime. It's just you should be mindful of the conversation that you're having. If you're saying something like, I think you should add that to the report, that is probably not okay, but if it's kind of a more theoretical discussion, you might want to check with someone before you have that conversation. But certainly anything about what the content of the report should be, I can tell you is off limits.
And just to clarify, I think in that situation, it really also depends on in what capacity you're attending that open meeting. So is one of you speaking and the other 2 are part of several people in attendance, or are 2 of you speaking? And because the back and forth matters. So if one of you is speaking and 5 of you are just listening along with 100 other people, that's not really communicating. You could argue that. So it really is fact specific. It starts really mattering when 3 of you, maybe after one of you makes a speech and the other 2 are in the audience, get together and say, you had great ideas. Let's do that at the next work group meeting, or so it's really fact specific. But just be mindful of when you have more than 2 of you communicating in any kind of setting.
And I agree with that point. If the communication is taking place in the public context of a conference and you're both on the panel, that's okay under the exemption.
I was just going to jump in and perhaps help my colleague here a little bit, because I think for those of us that work for the public sector, we're quite accustomed, a good thing or bad thing too, the back routine, rules. I know it sounds quite restrictive, like, gosh, we couldn't even talk to, like, the 4 of us here work for the same technology role. We're like, we better not even walking together. Afraid of the perception that we're talking. But I think if I may add to the council's opinion, advice here, a lot of it is just common sense applied. If it's, if the 3 of us happen to be the same public event, we can talk about, this is a great dessert that they're serving, after the speaking room, but not necessarily, and then, items related, just not about the work that we do at this work group together. And I think that's to the point that the council member mentioned, that as long as we keep those in mind, that topics that we're going to be discussed at this work group should be limited to the work group setting, I think that opens up, your practice, if you would, that as long as you kind of practice that discipline, it's not as scary as it might seem. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it's manageable.
Am I trying to scare you? Just not too much.
I have an additional question.
Hold on, there's somebody else.
We're working many of us are working very actively in this field and writing extensively, and I'm coming out with a book on this topic, and one of the chapters is about public sector and blockchain. It's content that's already been written, but will be open now because it's going to be released and published. It's also something that, as we as members are going out and about at different events or meetings or what have you, and we're talking actively about certain topics that are quite broad, not necessarily saying this is something we're working on in this working group, of course, but even just in general context, if we're talking about something like, I don't know, digital identity or things that we're obviously going to be talking about within this working group, but it is a general topic that we're actively working with. Do you have any more guidelines on how we navigate that in a way that doesn't violate the privacy? Thank you.
And would the conversations have to be more than one other person who might be on a committee?
It might. I mean, the thing is that many of us are, because blockchain is, there is an ecosystem, and as another member pointed out, this is about the ethos of blockchain is about people meeting and talking about this thing, and we're working in ecosystem fashion. And so much of our work can crisscross at times with other people that are on this group, for example. So what are the guidelines in terms of how we navigate some of the topics that I'm pretty confident will come up as a course of conversation within this working group, but we're not necessarily alluding specifically to the working group, but it is going to be a different forum, and we might have other people involved that are members of the working group. So I just want to understand kind of how those lines can be unblurred a little bit.
I don't know that I have a good answer. I think it's something that we might have to give you advice as these things come up, and you give us something more specific about what you might be asking about.
Well, just in topics in general. I mean, I just want to understand, and maybe I need to read the magazine to understand the specificities a bit better, but topics such as digital identity or topics such as privacy, security, I mean, these are issues that are just general topics of great concern within the blockchain community that we're actively writing about, speaking about, etc. And these forums that we participate in can involve one or two more other members of the group, just because that's the ecosystem nature of this field. It may not make specific reference to, of course, the implementations and conversations specifically with this working group, but the topics as a whole and the theme as a whole is something that is quite out there. And these are things that we're actively working with. So I just want to have a better sense of guideline of how do I respect the constraints of the Back-to-Keene Act and yet not feel like, well, I can't talk about this topic at all because now we've got another member of the body in this group, in this open forum, in a different forum, but this is a topic that I'm actively working with. Does that make sense? It's a lot of gray area here.
Hold on,
so I'm just trying to understand a little bit more.
So just hold on a second. I know you want to answer that, and that was an important question that I think is on everybody's mind. We have several people, so we'll come back and just take you in a row after you respond.
What I would say is if what the topic of your conversation is going to be part of a specific recommendation that's going to appear in the report, you probably want to avoid having that conversation. If it's more generic about the topic and it will only be peripherally something that's going to be mentioned in the report, but it's not really affecting a specific recommendation. I mean, it's really, this is a very, it's a question that's kind of, doesn't have a lot of easy answers, and it's obvious that it's going to be a problem when this particular group of people who seem to have a lot of collaboration outside of this context. But I would focus on the fact that you're here to build consensus on very specific recommendations that will go to the governor, and you want to avoid trying to build consensus with others outside of a public meeting process on those recommendations. If you can try to keep that in mind, and your conversations aren't really affecting consensus building or what those recommendations might look like, I guess you would have to kind of ask yourself or check with council on, is this something that if the 3 or 4 or 5 of us are going to come to a consensus among the 5 of us on how to approach this particular topic, and that approach will be part of the recommendation, maybe we shouldn't try to agree on that right now, unless we're at a public meeting. Thank you. Liz?
So maybe I'm being a little bit too focused on the deliverable, but it looks like we have to deliver a report with policy recommendations in 9 months, approximately. And so I just want to, given how sort of practically work is actually done in terms of the drafting, reviewing, commenting, editing, and so forth, I assume we will be using online collaboration tools. So how, and I think this is where I got a bit confused, because Julia, you mentioned earlier that Bagley theme does not apply to online collaborations, and then I think that's when Deanne jumped in and talked about the ADA and how we have to essentially have public meetings whenever we collaborate. So are online collaborations allowed as we sort of start producing and producing this report?
If you mean online, like a draft will be emailed to you, and then you can email your comments to staff without telling any other member your comments, but not like a blog or any type of forum online that you submit your comments or drafts are available. No, I would say that probably the Bagley Act isn't going to contemplate something that's not ultimately where the public can be part of the process.
So I had in mind more contemporaneous online collaboration tools, and by that I mean, for example, if you use a tool like Google Docs, and I think Microsoft Word may even have like this function, you can actually do like real time, where like, for example, all of us can be on the dock at the same time making real time edits.
We actually have an opinion where this question was asked, can there be comments available? I think it was can something similar, where, look, we're going to do this online correspondence, but we'll make sure the public sees it. And it will be available to the public if they go on the website and they can click on it and they'll see the whole thing. And you said that was not, this was an opinion of the Attorney General, that was not permissible under the Bagley Act. So it's not something that we would say is okay under the current restrictions.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So what you're saying is that this group would not be allowed to essentially work all together on a document making real-time edits, even if that document was available to the public on a view-only basis?
Yes.
Okay. So we would actually have to then work using the more, traditional style of emailing stuff back and forth and having a single coordinator in the government?
Yeah, the traditional is not a bad word.
It's just not really efficient, right, given that we only have 9 months.
Just to clarify, there's also another way that I mentioned. There's a couple of different ways to do this. One would be what we just discussed, where one draft is emailed to everybody. Everybody only provides their comments to the staff person, so there's no really back and forth between any of you. And then at the next meeting, you could discuss all of those comments and come up with a second draft. The other way is to form work groups, subcommittees, perhaps on different topics, and you could draft different sections together that way. If there's two of you working on, for example, the security section of the report, the two of you could exchange drafts with each other and then present to the whole group that particular section of the report. So in that sense, you could have two of you collaborate on a section. That's an option, but it has to be also tightly controlled, like we mentioned, with the comments only going one way to the staff person once that section of the report is drafted and provided to the rest of the group. So that's one way if you want to have more than one person write the report.
We'll come back to that conversation. Yes. Sheila?
I just had a question and a comment. You talked a lot about consensus, that the problem seems to be if we're trying to achieve consensus around the topic specifically related to what might go in the report. But it sounds like, just to make sure understanding, if we're just talking about a topic more generally and the goal is not to achieve some sort of consensus or joint understanding or agreement about something that might be okay. And it's just an example to illustrate. So I've been on panels with many of you, and there's always a panel prep call, right? So that I could absolutely imagine a scenario in which three of us were at the same conference, we're asked to be on a panel together, and there was a prep call before the panel to talk about digital ID or whatever it might be. The goal wouldn't necessarily be, in fact, probably would not be to get to a consensus. It might be to actually stake out what we're discussing for the purposes of having a more lively conversation. It might actually involve some tension points created on purpose. So would that kind of thing be okay? How much is consensus important, or is that just still part of the throwaway?
What I know what we've said is if you're on a panel, we're not going to tell you you can't talk about what's under the jurisdiction of your state body. You are free to be part of that conference and participate fully in the panel and provide your comments. I haven't been asked a question about a briefing before the panel. It might be something you want to consider not having everyone be part of that.
I could put one more scenario, and I'll assist each other some other time. I think there's, let's say Liz, David, myself, and Sheila are on this prep call around digital identity. We're going to talk about it on the panel, but the call itself is obviously not a public environment. And we're all mapping out kind of what our positions are, and but we're not talking about, okay, Sheila, when you go to write the digital identity part of this document, could you please there with, it's the separation that seems safe to me in the example that we're back is, as long as we're not focusing those conversations on what's going to go into a document or be responsive to some question that's in front of us as a group, then that's the demarcation line. And that's easy for us to follow, I think. Is that,
yeah, I mean, I'm here to tell you what the restrictions are, and I'm hoping you use your best judgment as you are running, you will see each other in lots of different situations, and just be mindful of these conversations and ask yourself, is this something that could affect the work I'm doing? And is it something that the public would want to be part of that process, this conversation we're having right now? And if it's something that's more, just kind of generic discussion, you're probably less likely having a conversation that would be prohibited by the team. But there's a lot of gray areas in there, and we're just trying to give you some bright lines to follow.
How many people have gone to jail over that?
We have a question from or a comment from Marshall.
No, there is a process that is in use by the World Wide Web Consortium that creates standards for the web infrastructure on the internet. It's a very public and very open process, and I'm wondering if that might lend itself to complying with the Bagley-Keene Act. For instance, if a staff member is the only one who can create documents submitted by an individual or a subcommittee, and that gets posted to a public forum that is visible to all members as well as the public, but now the members of the working group can comment on the document, but they are not modifying the document, but they're providing comments to the staff member, and it is still public. And this process has been working very successfully in creating protocol standards that are used by all of us. It's a very, very publicly written, very legally constrained process. Would that be amenable to the working group?
I don't know that I think I like the idea better that if you're going to put out a draft and every member gets to comment.
Only comment, not modify the draft, and the comments essentially are going back to the staff member.
But it's not something everyone else can see?
It can be made public, it can be made private, depending on how it's configured. The tools exist out there.
Well, I think you've got a couple issues to the extent that the agency is conducting its business on this other format is really a question for a state agency to answer whether they're comfortable with that, because it's official government business at that point. I think they prefer to have these things on their website versus some other.
If it's a website, so for example.
Their agency website.
Okay.
Agency, yeah. So if you are proposing that there be a draft posted on the agency website, I think that's fine, and
a forum where comments can be provided.
The comments portion is the problematic part, because the point of having your comments only emailed to the staff person who then does not communicate with anybody else until it's all presented at an open meeting again, is that you shouldn't be seeing each other's comments without being a part of the public forum. And I know that online nowadays it's considered a public forum, but under the law, under Bag and Keen, a public forum is this. So,
I see. So it's a formal convening of the working group members.
Right. So if you are posting comments publicly, but nobody else can really adjust that, but your fellow work group members are also seeing your comments live before the meeting, from each other, then it's starting to influence and build consensus before that open meeting occurs. So that's kind of a consideration or an issue that can arise. So everything that you discuss amongst yourself, the public and everyone else should be able to participate, including written comments. That's the key. So if that method is only used to communicate with the staff and no other work group member sees that until the next meeting, that would be fine. Which was my initial example, but if you're seeing each other's comments before the next meeting and you already have an inkling of what everybody is saying, that's the issue. So I'm not so well versed in all the different methods of communication nowadays, but that's the main consideration.
If I may make some investigations and bring it up to you or to Gabby, is that all right? So as a way of determining whether it's compliant with the law?
Yeah, so any questions the work group members have about legal issues, any other your own communications with each other, whatever issues you may have, email them all to the staff person, to Gabby, and then she will send them to me or to the AG's office if we need special assistance, or anybody else that might need to chime in, and then we can present you with an answer back.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate the discussion with regard to the report developments, since that's going to be something that we're going to be spending a lot of time thinking about. Maybe we end up with this group making recommendations for the Bagley Care. But another thing that you touched on that I just want to hear any thoughts you have. I know we're going to get into more discussion around it, but working group members may have resources as far as information, reports, articles, documents that would be helpful for the full work group to read ahead of meetings, and any thoughts you have about how do we collect information suggested by working group members and how we share it with the working group and the public.
Well, we recommend the best approach is anything you want to share with the group, you send to Gabby, and then Gabby can distribute it to everyone. That way it doesn't look like you're having communications with among yourselves. And then however you want to make that available to the public is really up to each individual agency, whether you want to post it on your website or just have it available if someone requests them.
There is a resources section in the GovOps website that we can figure out, because there are reports out there that might be useful for us all to share. And I think the method that you suggest is a good one, that we can send them to Gabby and then she can distribute by BCC to all of us, but there might be others that we would want to make more public. I know that other states, for example, have also convened blockchain working groups, and I think having some of that work available not only to this group but to the broader public might be useful just as points of comparison and to feed into our discussion.
And just one other thing to clarify is that it sounds like there's a lot of concern about consensus building in this method, I guess, of communication. And one thing to keep in mind is that for each topic you want to discuss, you could agendize that topic and leave as much time for it as obviously your schedules allow and the meeting space allows. So if you want to build consensus amongst yourselves, for example, on this issue of security with blockchain, you can agendize that item for like a 2-hour conversation. All of you could talk about it for those 2 hours as much as you want in an open meeting, and by the end of it, you might actually have that section of the report already written or an outline, and you can also take a vote on, let's say you've discussed it for 2 hours, and now you want to see if the general agreement is that A, B, and C are security issues that should be included in the report. You can vote on that at the end of that discussion and make that decision that way. So it's not, the deliberation in this forum can be as long and as in-depth as necessary, as long as it's agendized and you've shared, the articles with Gabby and she's shared them with you. You can discuss any of that information as much as you want until there's consensus. That's possible.
Any other comments on it?
The concern is more around the fact that this act seems to be antithetical to the way business is conducted in the technology world these days, especially with the creation of standards. I participate on a number of standards groups, and I'm trying to figure out how on earth are we ever going to accomplish this in 9 months if we only have to meet 3 times and publicly, without the tools and processes that we are used to currently, all of which are public, of course. It's extraordinarily difficult to bring consensus, but I guess we have to abide by the law.
Thank you. So yes, I thank you for that guidance and the ongoing attendance in the meetings and continued guidance for our discussions. I know it does feel, for me too, coming to meetings like this quite constraining. I was like, what, we can't do so. So I'm trying to figure out how we can best accommodate the rules that we need to, and yet get the work done in a way that's going to be productive for all of us. But I also did want to highlight that we have a note taker at all of our meetings. So this method of having kind of in-depth discussions about particular topics might be another way to go, where we can get a lot of work done actually within the agenda of the meeting. And then we can just report back and have people comment on that. But I'm hoping that might also be a method one among perhaps several. So we're going to take a break. And we'll give ourselves maybe another 5 minutes, and so plan to come back right at 12 noon. And then we'll actually dive into the content of the report, which will be exciting. And then take another short break for lunch. So let's return right at 12 o'clock. Also, FYI, I think all the microphones stay on.
When I introduce myself, add a slot.
Yeah. I was
Second floor.
I want to see what anyway, I'm making a list of
I just line up my
that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties.
But I think we can, Is it 9 o'clock?
Yes, I do. All right,
I'll ask my first. Good to see you.
So I think that,
That I ran by. So what I would suggest is that, blockchain for website, but we should have 2 weeks ago. And then we invite committee members to send their comments to Gabby. Yeah, the full members, to send their comments to Gabby. And then we iterate the draft and incorporate the comments, say that we will put out. In fact, we can second. We can say, hey, we're having this open meeting on Monday. And you're going to be able to see this. You send in comments. We will integrate and iterate. And the second meeting, the second public meeting will be on Thursday. And we'll post the results.
What happened is by 2 is like the final recap of what you did. And I was like, you guys know? Yeah, tease it out the story, but it's like,
Right. Well, I confirmed with you. So we have to set up that conversation. So we have to set up that conversation. Yeah, we can start. You could have two,
Maybe it'll be easier, because there's a lot of technology, there's media, there's we're gonna have it, so I'll probably get it down to the picture. Like I'm getting my stuff.
One of the things you did is you scheduled the program. We scheduled the two at the same time, so then you can turn it quick.
I've known her before. Thinking about maybe I could get information
Yeah, right, and I used to write briefings for each meeting, briefings, so I would teach. Right.
But you know, $3,000.
And I didn't care. One of you could have asked. But we just need to speak it, right, and then have some brief.
But we don't want to limit that. I know that
So we used to bang out drafts and then get a comment on them and then turn around. So there's a hub and spoke.
I'll send it back.
Thank you.
But there is, you guys have a good case. Right, right, so we can just, right, we can post it. So this is doable. This is doable. Yeah. Oh, no. Well, you have to change everything. We won't be able to use that.
Right.
I work.
Hey, nice to meet you. Me too. I just wanted to say yeah, I just wanted maybe 15-minute break or so, but yeah, it's a pretty good team. It's been good grant.